Welcome back to the Kriya Yoga Podcast. This is episode 19, and today we're going to be talking about meaninglessness, meditation, and losing interest in life. Is it a good thing? This topic was brought to my attention over the past several weeks during our monthly Kriya Yoga online question and answer session. People will tune in and ask questions, or sometimes they'll email me questions, and it seems that lately this topic has come up several times, so I thought it was worth addressing. And there's a lot of nuance to this. For example, my Kriya Yoga teacher, Roy Eugene Davis, I can remember reading in the Truth Journal, which was a magazine that he released continuously for several decades. In the Q&A section, this question would always pop up. The person would say, the more I meditate, or the more I become interested in the spiritual path, the less I'm interested in my life. And consistently, Roy would always recommend that if you start to feel that you are losing interest in life or losing enthusiasm, you might want to back off the meditation a little bit, not be so intensive about it. And I clearly saw the logic and the wisdom in that, because I would experience this too. The more I would spend time meditating, the more I would reflect upon spiritual literature, I became more and more interested in my internal landscape. I wasn't so enthusiastic about the stuff that everyone else was interested in. And since I was in my 20s and 30s when I was learning Kriya Yoga and practicing Kriya Yoga with Mr. Davis, it was really important for me to stay engaged in life. Because I had responsibilities, I was married, I had bills to pay, and to just shrivel up and not be engaged in the objective world, it really wasn't that helpful. So this is a beginning way to look at this. You don't want to avoid your life. And we're going to talk about a lot of different aspects of this, because the more I have practiced Kriya Yoga, the more I have studied meditation and explored these Eastern sciences, I do agree with Mr. Davis's statements and his wisdom. However, I also feel that sometimes the more we grow spiritually, those things which aren't really supportive of us, they need to naturally fall away. And so we're going to talk about that, how to determine if you are growing spiritually and just becoming a little more focused in regards to what is important to you, or if you are simply retreating from life, if you are avoiding life. We might even spend some time talking about this astrologically, as I'm working on a new book on one of the principles of astrology called Shadbala, and I've been spending a lot of time on the chapters dealing with this very issue, specifically as it relates to the planet Saturn, which is a planet that rules over and gives us the capacity to be alone and fulfilled within ourselves. But negatively, it can get us engaged in avoidance or escapist tendencies. So we have to really spend some time with ourselves in self-reflection, determining, is this process, this sense of meaninglessness, this sense of lack of interest in life, is it the result of greater wisdom, or is it the result of a type of escapism? And we have to begin looking at this by considering one of the fundamental difficulties of meditation, especially when you are not part of a tradition or you don't have a mentor that can help guide you in the process, especially if you're trying to do this all on your own. It's very easy to get caught up in our own subjective ideas about things. And if we don't have an outside viewpoint to help us zoom out and see the bigger picture, it's easy for meditators to stumble in this area. They might start to think that meditation is so great. I enjoy it so much. Why should I go out and spend all this money socializing with my friends when I could just stay home? Or many times when people experience profound states within meditation, it becomes a lot more enjoyable than what they might experience interacting with the world, interacting with the ever-changing principles of light and dark and positive and negative. There is a greater sense of fulfillment there. And so when that starts to develop, again, it can be very easy to not feel inspired to participate in the world. In fact, one of the questions that was sent to me for our online question and answer session reads, "The difficulty I'm facing with the sudden advancement in my meditation is that I find I have less motivation in managing daily life and relationships. They seem rather dull and mundane in comparison. I find it difficult that my family and friends are not interested or open to a more spiritual way of life. It seems as though success in meditation is making other things more difficult." So there's a lot we can look at within this statement. And the first thing I want to zero in on is the comment that I find it difficult that my family and friends are not as interested or open to a more spiritual way of life. Well, your family and friends don't need to be interested in a more spiritual way of life. Now, if your family and friends, they don't behave well, they mistreat other people, or they're thoughtless or careless or self-absorbed, and so that situation can cause problems for you and pretty much everyone else. And so if you're concerned about that, well, I completely understand. And that's a whole different topic. That's a whole different problem. Because you can be around people who are not interested in what you are interested in spiritually. But if they are kind, loving, supportive, you get along well, you have good rapport, they're mature, they don't have to be spiritual. They don't have to talk about spirituality at all with you. Just being able to be with someone like that is a very positive force within your life. So if your family and friends are like that, well, don't worry about if they're interested in spirituality. In my own life, I have very few people around me that I talk about this with. I talk about it with my partner. That's probably about it. I do have lots of friends that I've known over these many decades who are also students of Roy's or interested in spirituality, but they live all over the world. So I might talk to them on Zoom maybe once or twice every few months or so. But I don't have a regular group of people to talk about this with. However, the people I do spend time with, they're musicians, they like nature, they like hiking, gardening. And so when we get together, that's what we do. We talk about those things, or we do those things. And there's really no need to get into our spiritual thoughts or our philosophies. Now, the first part of this comment, the difficulty I'm facing is with this sudden advancement in my meditation, I find I have less motivation in managing daily life and relationships. Okay. So when that happens, is that bad? Once again, it could be if you're really just trying to escape from life, if that is the subtle reason you are meditating. We have to be very aware of these subtle reasons that we meditate. However, when we lose certain motivations about aspects of our life, it could mean that we are changing internally, and maybe some of those things really aren't that important. Maybe the amount of socialization that you're used to isn't really that supportive of you. It's not that you're losing interest or motivation. It might be that you're actually realizing some aspects about how you choose to live, and you're outgrowing something. And we can see this as we develop from a child to an adult. As we move from a child to an adult, if we are maturing through that process, there are a lot of things that are interesting to a child that are not interesting to a teenager. And there are a lot of things that are interesting to a teenager that are not interesting to a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old. And there are a lot of things interested that those people find interesting that are not at all interesting to 40, 50, 60, 70-year-old person. And if we spent all of our time feeling bad that we're not interested or motivated to do the same things we liked when we were a teenager or into our 20s, we would never really grow. We would never really experience the full effect of what it means to live a human life. And when we couple this, when we add the evolutionary power of meditation to this process, well, think about those people that we consider or often look to as spiritual role models: saints, sages, monks, nuns, priests. These are people whose world is very focused on their spiritual practice. Now, they still take care of their body. They still take care of their homes. They still nurture the community. But their frame of reference is very different than the average person you'll find on the street. They don't care about going out with their friends. They don't care about exploring the latest new musical act. They're not thinking in the way that most other people in the world are thinking, who are caught up in worldly life. And this is where it gets a little tricky and a little difficult, because when you step on a spiritual path, you are learning to release attachments. You are learning to evolve into a kind of understanding which is very different than, again, the average person. Now, does that mean you can't have a family? Does that mean you can't have a job? Does that mean you can't have friendships or relationships? That's not what it means at all. Within this Kriya Yoga tradition was introduced to the world with the idea that it was for householder yogis, for people who were participating in the world, who had children, who had wives and husbands and careers. Because before that, a lot of these practices were reserved for those yogis, those individuals who gave up the world, renounced the world to live an extremely simple life. Well, the trouble with being a householder and a yogi is this: you still have to live a simple life. If you're running around everywhere, going on every single vacation that you can, are so interested in everything in the world, well, just live your life. Just enjoy the world. Because the way that this practice works, the way that all spiritual practices work, are to direct you internally, direct you to the source of spirit, to help you see, where did you come from? What is your soul nature? What is your eternal, unchanging self? And you can't do that if you are distracted by every little thing that comes your way. So sometimes as we progress spiritually, we are going to hit plateaus, or we are going to hit stages of experience where you're going to find that you need to really change your life. You need to become more focused. You need to determine within this life, what is really important for me? Meaning, what is important for me to engage in so that I can, again, take care of myself, so that I can live well, that I can take care of those people who I am responsible for. But ultimately, when we think about yoga and we remember that principle of brahmacharya, which is said to be going like God or conserving our vital resources, if we are serious about this, that's what we have to do. Our fundamental compass needs to be, does this behavior, does this relationship, does this situation actually give me the capacity to turn my awareness within and to focus on spirit? That's the question. If it doesn't, you have to let it go. And you have to keep in mind that 90% of the people around you aren't thinking that way at all. They're thinking about, how do I fill up my stomach? How do I have more sex? How do I get more prestige? How do I experience more fame? How do I experience some form of greater field or greater sense of safety within my life? Now, again, many of these things, they fall under this hierarchy of needs, and they do help us live as a healthy human being. But again, when we ask the question, what is supporting my spiritual practice? Maybe you don't need as much of that stuff as you think you do. And so as you begin to change, you feel a lot different because no one else is thinking that way. And you're going to cause yourself a lot of struggle, a lot of difficulty, if you keep hoping that that's not the case. The spiritual path is really no different than any other path that leads to some form of specification, of some form of focus. Athletes who are focused on their goal to be a successful athlete, they live their life to support that, which means they sacrifice time with family and with friends to be at the gym or to train. They sacrifice their time to go on vacations. They direct their finances so that they can have really good food to support that process. Individuals who are very intellectually driven, who are scientists or philosophers, they make all kinds of sacrifices because what is important to them is their philosophy, their science, their exploration. And it's no different being a yogi. It's just that we have a lot of modern propaganda, a lot of modern marketing that promotes spirituality as though if you are focused on your spirituality, all things will come to you. You will be able to have whatever you want. And that's not true. That's not real spirituality. That's a transactional form of magical thinking. So does that mean that life is no fun? No, it's not what that means at all. In my own life, while my lifestyle is very different than it was in my 20s, when I was younger, I don't go out. I don't do all the things that I wanted to do when I was younger. And to be fair, I really didn't do a whole lot then either, because I was really focused on this path from a very young age. But comparatively, relatively speaking, I do a lot less. But what I do, I very much enjoy. While I spend many hours a day meditating, I also spend many hours a day working, creating podcasts, teaching classes, planning for retreats, updating websites, all this stuff that goes into this whole process. And when I'm not doing that, I really enjoy playing music. And when I get together with my friends who play music, I deeply enjoy that. I find it extremely satisfying. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and I was always interested in science fiction and fantasy and elves and dragons and magic. And so I've always really loved fantasy novels, and I've also really loved the game Dungeons and Dragons. It really can take up a whole lot of my mental space. And so once a week, I play Dungeons and Dragons with my daughter and a couple other friends. And I love it. I love spending time planning those things, thinking about those things. I love the interaction. I love how it keeps me creative and helps keep me on my toes, thinking quickly about things. And it's a lot of fun now because I'm an older person, and I can remember being a child and a teenager, and playing Dungeons and Dragons was not cool. So now all of a sudden, it's all right. It's all right. And it's very popular. More people know about it. It's more acceptable. So these are some things that I do for fun. Now, do I obsess about them? Do I go to Dungeons and Dragons conferences? Do I go to things that take up a whole lot of my time when it comes to music? No, I do not. I'm very focused. When I'm doing it, I'm very much enjoying it. When I'm not doing it, I'm doing whatever else is called for. That could be working on the house. That could be mowing the grass. Again, going for hikes in nature, spending time at lakes and swimming in rivers. These are all fun things. But I don't let it get in the way of my spiritual practice. If it's going to get in the way of my spiritual practice, if it's going to cause me to not have as much time to meditate as I would like, if it's going to get in my way of working with students or being able to have time to meet with students through Zoom or through classes, well, then I don't do it. And I would also say that the experience itself of growing through these stages of life, they haven't always been easy. I certainly had moments where I grieved, where I was having to let go of things that I thought was enjoyable previously. But I knew that that was part of the process. And so that grief wasn't overwhelming. I honored it. I actually felt it. I experienced it. And I said, okay, I'm recognizing I'm entering a different stage of my practice, a different stage of my life. And so I embraced it. I allowed myself to feel the sadness of it passing. And then I would ask myself, all right, well, now that I've let go of that, how can I turn my attention again more fully to my studies, to my meditation? What does that mean for me? And then I would begin to adjust my life to explore that. And I wouldn't always figure it out immediately. Sometimes it would take some trial and error. But I had the intention. I knew I had the internal compass to stay focused on my spiritual path. And I was very solid in the direction I was going because, again, I had a wonderful teacher, Roy Jean Davis. And I've also had the support of another teacher exploring Sanskrit and exploring the Yoga Sutras. And they were so inspiring to me, I wanted to move in the same direction that they were moving. When I think about the teacher who inspired me to get more fully interested in Sanskrit and the Yoga Sutras, Vyas Houston, I absolutely admired his dedication to the Sanskrit language. And for me, it was really a great blessing because the things I learned from him about the Yoga Sutras, it wasn't philosophical, it wasn't academic, it wasn't just more words in my mind that I could speak about at lectures and make people think, oh, wow, how knowledgeable he is about this stuff. What I learned from him about the Yoga Sutras exponentially deepened my own practice, my own understanding. And to see that, to feel that, was absolutely inspiring. And I believe he's about 30 years older than me. As I look forward to my life, I think if I'm able to experience what I can experience now, if I continue to study in the way he's directed me, in 30 years, I can't even imagine what it's going to be like. And that's very enjoyable. It's a good place to be. The same thing with Mr. Davis. He was, he was 50 years older than me? Yeah. But when I observed his life and when I observed his state of consciousness, I looked forward to that. And he was very solitary. He didn't spend a whole lot of time really doing much of anything, as far as I know, other than meditating, leading retreats, and writing books, and working with students. But when I was around him, when I was able to participate and experience, again, his field of consciousness, his field of wisdom and knowing, I would think to myself, wow, he's 50 years older than me. Well, again, if I am experiencing what I am experiencing now because of this practice, when I am at his age, I can't imagine what that's going to be like. And so when I saw him being solitary, when I saw him not super engaged in life like everyone else was, I thought that's great. That must be a wonderful direction to go. But he wasn't avoiding life. He was being very focused on what his own duty was. And that brings us to the idea of, is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? Well, I mentioned I was working on this book. It's called Shadbala. The topic is Shadbala. It means like the six strengths of a graha, or of a planet, in Vedic astrology. And I was actually inspired to begin writing this book because last fall, in 2025, we did a 12-week introduction to Vedic astrology class for spiritual growth and self-harmony and self-knowledge. It was extremely inspiring. And Shadbala is another way of getting to know yourself if you know how it works. And so I began writing this. And one of the main themes of this is the positive and negative qualities of a planet. So for example, oftentimes we'll say someone is very Martian if they're very forceful, if they're very violent, if they're very aggressive. Well, that's not a strong Mars. That's an overcompensating Mars. Because when Mars is strong, Mars just takes care of problems. He's really relaxed. He's not looking for a fight, but he knows that if a fight shows up, he can handle it and then he can relax again. And maybe you know a lot of people like that who are just cool. They're just smooth. They don't worry about a whole lot. Why? Because they know if trouble comes along, they can handle it. Well, the same thing is true of Saturn, in that many people think when a person is aloof or solitary or alone, that is a strong Saturn. Well, it could be, but it depends on the motivation. If you are aloof, solitary, and alone because you are afraid of the world, you are fearful, you are full of anxiety, well, that's not a strong Saturn. That is a Saturn that needs some attention. But Saturn is the planet that deals with letting go of things in a healthy way. And you know, in life, sometimes chapters end. Relationships are done. Things are over. And it's time to let go and move on to something else. And what Saturn does is it gives us the capacity to recognize, okay, that chapter's over. Let's turn the page. And not be pining for that chapter. Or to know that this relationship has run its course. That's okay. Everything changes. Let's let it go. So here's the thing. As a human being, especially one interested on the spiritual path, you're not practicing spirituality so that you can remain eternally engaged in the human drama. That's a particular stage of development. You're practicing spirituality so that you can continue your progression. You can continue to reconcile, harmonize all your desires that you had as a human being. But then there comes a time when those spiritual desires become more important. When you recognize that living for God, living for the Divine Mother, when you really understand what that means, so don't get so caught up in your own ideations of what I just said, because the experience of it is very different than these pop culture ideas that you might have in your mind about that. But when you start to realize that living with a spiritual focus and a spiritual compass is actually what life is all about, then you have no trouble feeling as though it's okay to let these things go. It's okay to let this drama go. It's okay if I'm not interested in the same things that the rest of the world is interested in. It's really great that what I am interested in are what the saints are interested in, what the sages were interested in, what the yogis were interested in, what all these people who found fulfillment in a divine calling or a divine experience or a spiritual path or a meditational path, when you start to really feel like them, that's not a bad thing. That just means your meditation is working. And when that happens, yes, if you are a householder with a family, you'll still be inspired to want to provide for your family, but you're not going to be excessive about it anymore. You're still going to want to maintain relationships with your family and your friends, but you're not going to have this overwhelming sense that you are responsible for every good thing that they experience. You begin to recognize that we all have our own karma, and you certainly are meant to live in a way that is harmonious with them. But you begin to feel and to know that they have their own path. And there is a capacity for relinquishment and letting go of attachment to let them live their own lives. But once again, we have to be ever vigilant to make sure that when these things happen, that it's not because of some how would I put it? It's not because of some pathology, emotional, mental, psychological pathology. It's because you've really seen the reality of it. You've seen what is important and what is not important. And this occurs across the spectrum, meaning that, there are people who are so caught up in the news, so caught up in the newest this, that, or the other. And if you start to step away from that even a little bit, they think you're crazy. And there are other people that are stepped back a whole lot more. They don't even have social media. Can you believe it? And to, again, everyone else in the world, they say, oh, you're so disconnected. How can you not have that? But they are just at a place in life where they're able to thrive without that need, without that compulsion, really. And so when I remember the life of my teacher, who would go to sleep at 7 p.m. in the evening, as far as I understood. He would go to bed very early. He would wake up at 2 a.m. He would meditate, begin writing whatever projects he had. And then if there were retreats led, he would lead meditations and teach classes and have lunch and then maybe work a little bit more, but then retire by 2, 3 p.m. And again, end his day around 7 or 8. And that was his life. And he was very focused. Imagine if you had that life. You think that you're feeling different than people now. Well, just imagine if you were so focused in your life that you lived that way. And I always want to take you back. I always want to remind you about these people who have chosen a meditative life. And I know I've talked about this before on the podcast. I've always been moved by people who dedicated their life to the divine. Anytime I hear of someone like that, or maybe I'm in a monastery, or I'm in some sort of environment where I know that the people who participate in this environment, churches even, when they're really sincere, that touches me in a very sensitive way. And I find that that's very important. And this is really why we honor people who make that choice, because sometimes we can't make it for ourselves. But it is okay if we feel that making those choices of dedicating our lives to the divine, it's okay if we feel inspired to do that. Is it going to cause some difficulty with relationships or situations you're in? Well, temporarily. But if people really love you, they'll adapt. And if you really love them, then you're not going to stop participating with them. You just might have to have some conversations about what does and what doesn't support your choice in this matter. So one of the messages I feel is very important to share on this topic is that while we need to be vigilant to make sure we're not self-isolating or avoiding the world, I feel it's very important to honor and acknowledge if you are simply feeling a deeper call to explore more intently your spiritual path, whether it be through meditation or prayer or sacred study, to honor that. Because that's where you're going anyway, eventually. If not now, well, eventually at some point. So if it's arising in you now, it's important to find a way to grieve through any changes that might be necessary, but to embrace it, embrace the experience. And then you'll find that your life shifts in such a way that you really enjoy meditation more. You actually can spend a lot more time in meditation. You enjoy sacred study more. And then when you do interact with your family or your friends or your hobbies, it's much more alive. It's much more dynamic. It's much more purposeful. So shifting gears is really a good thing from time to time. Now, I received another comment where an individual said that they found it very difficult to connect to others. And they feel difficulty talking with other people because they don't really have the same kind of inner compass. And it's made them feel depressed. It's created even a diagnosable form of depression within them. And the hobbies and so on can feel difficult. There's not as much interest in these hobbies. Well, once again, please make sure that you are addressing any psychological issues that might be coming up here, because here's what happens when you meditate more. If you have deep-seated psychological troubles, if you have a part of you which is deeply depressed and unhappy for whatever reason, well, the more you meditate and the better you get at it, at some point in time, the light's going to shine so bright in your inner awareness that you're going to see that spot that seems like a shadow or a dark spot. You're not going to be able to avoid that sense of emptiness and that sense of lack. And again, why is it there? I don't know. You can find out. Again, I recommend emotional EMDR, eye movement, desensitization, reprocessing therapy. I recommend any kind of somatic therapy with a skilled therapist, internal family systems. The better you meditate, you are bringing more light to these different parts of your being. And if there are parts of you that you have not attended to that are deeply sad, that are unheard, that feel unloved, they're going to make themselves known. And you have to be able to be prepared for that, to recognize that's a possibility. And when it arises, don't look at it as a problem, because it's not a problem. It actually can be a very good thing. It means there's a part of you that feels so safe now that it can say, here I am. This is how I feel. I hope you can love me. I hope you can accept me. It feels safe enough to reveal itself and its insecurities to you. And if you keep meditating, but you don't really deal with it, well, it'll keep popping up, and it'll show up as things like depression, meaninglessness, a sense of lack, and all these things. But if you have a good internal family systems counselor or another counselor that you can address this with, you don't have to talk about your meditation. You just simply have to bring to them, this is what's been consistently coming up, and they'll say, all right, let's explore that. And if they're skilled, you will find a way to dialogue with that part of you. You will find out the real reason why you feel so sad and empty all of a sudden. You will become aware of that, and then you will be able to heal it. And then once you heal it, and it is resolved, and it has been seen, and has been reconciled, then your meditation has the capacity to open up into those realms of experience that, again, the great sages and saints and yogis and mystics, that they experience when they have learned to transcend, rise above, heal, move through these things. I'm not encouraging you to sidestep or to spiritually bypass. I want you to actually do the work. But once you do the work, the energy that becomes available to you, you are even more inspired to dive deeper into your field of consciousness, to experience your soul nature, your divine nature. And when you do this, even the atheistic parts of you will shudder a little bit, because you will have a very hard time admitting, acknowledging, or denying, I suppose, that divine presence. So when this happens, what I did when this happens is I leaned into it. I quit fighting it. I spent a lot of my life trying to relate to everyone else, to understand why they thought the way they did, to feel the same form of importance that they gave to all the different things of life. And I kept trying to inspire myself to do that. But it was when I began to realize that maybe it's just not that important to me, that my own spiritual understanding, my own spiritual life began to peel wide open. And most of my time, most of my days focus on study, meditation, teaching, writing related to spiritual things. But as I mentioned, it's very easy for me to go play music and have a good time. For example, in a couple days, it's going to be St. Patrick's Day, and I play Irish music, which means that I've got 3 shows to perform with my band 3 days in a row, which is a lot of time, but it's only 3 days, and I'll get back to my meditation. In fact, I will keep meditating, and I will keep studying the same way that I do during those moments. It just so happens that during those 3 days, I might be spending 3 to 4 hours playing music instead of something else. once a week, I'll spend time playing Dungeons and Dragons with my daughter and my friends. But then the rest of the week, 90% of the rest of the time, that's not what I'm doing. When the summer comes, I'll spend time working outside, swimming, going for hikes. And that's a part of something I really enjoy. So when I do it, I deeply and truly give my attention to it. But most of the rest of my time, I've decided to lean fully into the spiritual path. And because of this, everything else I do contains that feeling, that field that I feel when I'm in meditation, when I'm studying Sanskrit or the Yoga Sutras, when I'm teaching. It all feels the same. The music feels like divine play. The creativity of coming up with a fantasy storyline feels like divine creativity. And that all happened for a few reasons. I gave myself permission to lean into it. For many, many years, I worked with a very skilled counselor as I navigated my meditation practice to help me resolve any deep-seated issues that I couldn't be objectively aware of. And I became very focused in regards to what I did with my life, very purposeful in regards to my activities in life. And I still feel stages that come and go of adjustment. There are still moments where I realize I have to let go of certain things. And so I do. I grieve it. I move on. I look forward to the next stage, the next realization. I look forward to what's possible. And I accept that meaninglessness or lack of interest in life just might be an indication for a change, and it might take a good deal of work to figure out what that change is, but it's just an indication of a change. It's an indication of a call maybe to something deeper. Now, one final email question that I want to speak to. This comes from one of the students in our advanced Kriya Yoga training class. He was at the last class, but he's from India, and his email wasn't working. I think it was even 3 a.m., which is great. Well, 1 a.m. It was 1 a.m. during the class. It really, to me, shows a deep sense of dedication because we live on opposite sides of the planet. But he cut out, and I was answering this question. He wanted me to restate it. Someone had asked about identifying with the self, identifying with spirit, even when you're not meditating. And this person is considerably younger than I am and very much involved in family and work. And so I can understand where the struggle might be. And what I said was, I treat my meditation practice as though it is the training ground, which means the techniques, the contemplations, the processes that I know and practice, those help to guide me into a recognition of what is this self that we contemplate? What is this divine essence? What is Ishvara? What is Divine Mother? I contemplate these things until experience dawns or an understanding dawns. And then as I go through my life, I don't continuously keep saying in the back of my mind, this is what it's like, this is what it's like. I don't turn it into a mechanical repetition. What I do is I go into my life and I simply participate, but continue to remember, imagine, feel that same state of awareness, that same state of understanding. And it can be very difficult, especially if you're extremely busy. But here's the thing, it's all practice, which means the more you touch it, the more you experience it, the more you realize it in your meditation, and the more you just bring it up throughout your day. Remember, feel, try to live from that understanding incrementally, millimeter by millimeter, bit by bit. It becomes more and more available to you when you're acting, when you're breathing, when you're working, when you're cooking, when you're arguing, when you're listening to music, when you're hiking, it becomes more and more accessible to you. And so the more you practice it, the more you remember the experience from meditation. And again, imagine it into and through your day. In time, it becomes stable even when you are moving, when you are acting, when you are engaging the world. But that's not going to happen unless you make a conscious intention in that direction. Because what a lot of people do is they'll meditate for half hour, 2 hours, who knows. But then they get up and they go right back to being angry or frustrated, or they go right back to worrying about this or thinking about that. If that's all you're doing, well, you're doing great for yourself as it comes time to practice meditation. But this is meant to expand throughout your life. It's meant to be the totality of your life. And so by aiming to remember this, to feel it, you begin to bring it more fully into your day. And eventually your days turn into weeks. Your weeks turn into months. And your months turn into years. And then you end up feeling that way all the time. You recognize it all the time. It becomes permanent. And that's what we're working towards, that permanent realization of what we are as an immortal spiritual being. And to clarify, with this process, as I mentioned, I don't continuously repeat it in the back of my mind. I don't have this obsessive voice saying, be the self, everything is the divine. That's not what's happening. When I was in my 20s, I might have done it that way. And in my 30s, possibly too. But now you have to recognize that it's just sustaining a feeling, a knowing, and living from that. Otherwise, all you're doing is just kind of obsessively, compulsively talking to yourself, which might be better than some other thoughts that you have. But our goal is not to turn your spiritual path into another obsession or a compulsion. It's meant to give you freedom. It's meant to help you really, truly be alive. You may have heard the story, I'm sure I've told it many times before. When I was probably 23 or so, I had begun practicing Kriya Yoga several years earlier, and I was introduced to Ramana Maharshi. And I fell in love with Ramana Maharshi. And he would ask the question, who am I? And then I read another book as I was studying Ayurveda by David Frawley. I think it's like Lighting the Lamp of Awareness, something like that. It's been a long time since I read it. But he kind of, if I remember, he sort of indicated that you must constantly have this question in your mind. And I took that to heart. And so what I did was I got all these yellow sticky notes out, the little things you write on to keep track of reminders and memos. And all over my apartment, I put on my cabinet, on my teacup, on the toilet, on the door, anything that I would look at, who is looking at the door? Who is using the toilet? Who am I? They were everywhere. And at the time I was married, and my wife was away at massage school. And when she came home and she saw that the house was covered in sticky notes that constantly was reminding us to remember, who am I? Who is the doer? Who is the one that sees this? She very promptly said, yeah, we're not doing that. And so I had to take them all down and just obsessively, compulsively think it to myself. And was that helpful? Maybe a little bit. But I don't want you to have to go through that same thing that I did. So make it more of a practice of simply being patient with yourself and meditating as well as you can during your meditation session. It will naturally begin to permeate your day. But then when you're not meditating and you're engaged in whatever you're doing in life, from time to time, just reflect and remember the feeling as best as you can recall. What was it like to understand, feel, be the self? And then live from that. If you were established in that right now, how would you live? How would you behave? And the more you do that, the easier it becomes. All right. Thank you for tuning in once again. It's always great to talk to you. It's always great to hear from you as well. our next podcast, I think it's episode 20. Hopefully this is episode 19. Episode 20, I'm interviewed by Pushya Mistry. And he's a student of the Kriya Yoga Apprenticeship Program and now the Advanced Kriya Yoga Program. And one of the themes we're going to be talking about is one awakening experience enough? Can you just have one and that's it? That'll be one of our main themes. Then we'll talk about several other interesting topics. So I hope you can tune in, and I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Kriya Yoga Podcast. To learn more about Kriya Yoga meditation, you can visit us at kriyayogaonline.com, where you can find information about current book releases, online classes, and in-person retreats throughout the year. If you're interested in supporting this podcast, visit us at the Kriya Yoga Online Patreon community at patreon.com/Kriya Yoga.